So quite a story was just released by The Guardian. This is huge, and this actually, in my opinion, is only rivaled by, the Edward Snowden, Glenn Greenwald, NSA leaks. Like, this seems like the logical follow-up to that story. Now, of course, since this particular story implicates the Israeli government, you don't have much, you don't have many stories being written on it from other media outlets. And it's a shame because this story really is gigantic and it's super important. So the title of the Guardian piece is Revealed, Leak Uncovers Global Abuse of Cyber Surveillance Weapon. Spyware sold to authoritarian regimes used to target activists, politicians, and journalists, data suggests. So, I mean, I know you guys know what clickbait is. Honestly, I think that headline is like anti-clickbait because the story is a hell of a lot more explosive than even that title would have you believe. So let me walk you through this. There's this Israeli spyware, and it's hacking spyware, and it's called Pegasus. Now, this spyware is really malicious and nefarious, and it does what's called a zero-click attack, which means you don't even need to click a bad link in order for this spyware to get into your phone. They just have to send you something, and then boom, your phone is completely compromised. It's been used to penetrate even the most up-to-date iPhones running on the latest version of iOS. That's terrifying because iPhone, as I'm sure many of you know, they sort of pride themselves on being the most secure of anything you can get. And with this particular spyware, you don't have to click on anything. They just send something to you, and boom, your whole thing is compromised. And they immediately have access to all of your text messages, all of your iMessages, all of the photos in your library. They could turn your microphone on and off. I mean, this is like a next level sort of intrusion. So wait until I get to the names of some of the people who are being spied on, or at least were on the list of the company that made Pegasus, which is, again, the name of the spyware. Now, when they did forensic analysis of a small subset, I forget how many people it was, 60 or 70, something like that. They did an analysis of their phones, the 60 or 70 people who were on the list, and about half of them were infected, or there was evidence that they were infected with this spyware. So the list is 50,000 people long, and they say, hey, it's not necessarily the case that all of them are being spied on, but they're on the list of people that clients of this company were interested in. So, in other words, they're either being spied on or at some point in the future will likely be spied on. So, again, they're targeting human rights activists, journalists, lawyers across the world who've been a target of authoritarian governments, and even like politicians, prime ministers, presidents. So this doesn't just affect iPhones; it also affects Android devices. The leak, as I said, contains about 50,000 phone numbers. They say also hundreds of business executives, religious figures, academics, NGO employees, union officials, and, as I said, cabinet ministers, presidents, prime ministers. The list even contains the numbers of close family members of one country's ruler. So, in other words, there's some dictator somewhere. They don't say specifically who it is yet, but this person was effectively trying to spy on their family members to see what they were doing. Now, overall, more than 180 journalists are listed in the data. That includes reporters, editors, and executives at the Financial Times, CNN, the New York Times, France 24, The Economist, the Associated Press, and Reuters, which, by the way, at least as of right now, a lot of these outlets haven't picked up this story, which makes me feel like, are you insane? Like, they're literally targeting you, and you haven't picked this story up yet? So here's where, I mean, it's already dark. Here's where it turns super dark. There's a phone number of a freelance Mexican reporter, Cecilio Pineda Berto. His name was found on the list. He was of interest to a Mexican client for this Israeli company selling the spyware. And he was murdered. He was murdered, and his killers were able to locate him at a car wash. So, I mean, all we have now is the name on the list and the time that the name was on the list, and then a couple weeks later, this person was killed. So we don't have the hard evidence yet, but it's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and it appears like this spyware was sold to somebody who then murdered a journalist. Now, listen, I'm no genius or anything, but that sounds to me like it's either some corrupt government official who was murdering somebody because they didn't want this person to uncover their corruption, or, you know, the Israeli company selling Pegasus was working with drug cartels. Now, they swear up and down, I mean, it's absurd on its face, but they swear up and down, no, we only sell this spyware so that terrorists and criminals can be targeted, and it's only sold to, like, official law enforcement. And we have a process where everybody's vetted, and the Israeli government has to approve the sale of the spyware to, you know, whoever we're selling it to, whoever the client is. First of all, I don't trust the the moral or ethical decisions of the Israeli government at all. They're wildly immoral and unethical. But beyond that, I simply don't believe that. Because as you can see, this list is really long, and it's got a lot of people on it, and it's got a lot of sketchy clients. So the clients include Azerbaijan. So the government of Azerbaijan, deeply authoritarian. We've talked about this guy before. Bahrain, Kazakhstan. A lot of clients in Mexico. Could be government officials and or drug lords. Morocco, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, India, the United Arab Emirates. It was used by Saudi Arabia. Get this, another huge bombshell here. The spyware was used by Saudi Arabia and its close ally, the UAE, to target the phones of the closest associates of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist who was murdered. And so the spyware, we know for sure, was used in the months after his death to make sure that his family members and the people closest to him weren't digging too much or didn't want revenge or something to that effect. Even the Turkish prosecutor investigating Khashoggi's death was also targeted with this spyware. I mean, again, this is huge. It's what we're uncovering here, or what The Guardian uncovered with the help of Amnesty International and some others, is basically a global spy network. It's a global surveillance network. So, more people who are on the list. If you think anybody's immune to this, you would be wrong. The South African president was on the list, and he appears, or this person, Cyril Ramaphosa, I don't know if that's a man or a woman, forgive me. This person appears to have been selected by Rwanda in 2019, so Rwanda wanted to spy on the South African president. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, appears to have been selected as a person of interest by Morocco in 2019. So somebody, a client in Morocco, whether it's the government or some businessman or whatever, wanted to spy on the French president. The French president was on the list of the 50,000 names. And listen, as I already told you, in the forensic analysis, about half the people of the 50,000 were already being spied on. And probably the ones who, the remainder, most of them would eventually be spied on. That's crazy. So the French prime minister or French president was on the list. Wow. The World Health Organization's director general was on the list. And again, somebody in Morocco was the client who wanted to spy on this person. Get this. The prime minister of Lebanon, who actually just resigned recently, this person was on the list, and they were selected by the UAE in 2018 and 2019. I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a time when the prime minister of Lebanon was kidnapped by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And now we know he was on the list. Hey, let's spy on this person. So the spyware that was used that led to the kidnapping of a prime minister was sold by this Israeli company. The King of Morocco, who was selected as a person of interest in 2019, was apparently selected by security forces in his own country. So again, now here's an example of there's a monarch or a head of state or an authoritarian ruler who the security forces in their own country were like, we're going to spy on him. Now, I'm sure the king did not want that, which means what? This could have been an example of an Arab Spring type situation where it's like they're trying to monitor him and maybe they're plotting, to do something at some point like overthrow him. Morocco's prime minister, again, so it was Morocco's king and Morocco's prime minister. They were selected as people of interest 2018 and 2019 from elements within their own country. Imran Khan, the prime minister of Pakistan, was selected by India in 2019 to spy on. Felipe Calderón of Mexico, that's the former Mexican president, his number was leaked in 2016 and 2017 to a Mexican client, and it was at the time when his wife was running to be president. And again, we don't know yet, but this could be from rival political factions, different elements of the government, or drug cartels that were spying. This is out of this world, and this I found interesting too. Robert Malley, a longtime American diplomat who was chief negotiator on the U.S.-Iran deal, he was spied on by Morocco in 2019. And by the way, the name of the company is, I think, NSO, the Israeli company that sells Pegasus. NSO said that its government clients are prevented from deploying its software against U.S. numbers because it's been made, quote, technically impossible. So at least in theory, the idea is U.S. officials, their government officials at least, have some sort of security that could even block this particular malware. I don't know if that's true because based on my reading of the situation, basically everything that this company said was bullshit. Oh, it's only used for criminals and terrorists. Oh, everything is vetted through the Israeli government. By the way, I love this. They say, we strictly vetted the human rights record of everybody who we sold this spyware to. Did you not hear who's on Saudi Arabia is on the list. Azerbaijan is on the list. Who are you kidding? You vetted their human rights record, found that they're terrible, and then still decided to sell them the spyware anyway. So, listen, it brings me no pleasure that, The Guardian did a phenomenal job here, and Amnesty International was one of the original people who got the list, and then I think some others were involved. But it brings me no pleasure and no joy at all that, again, you have to come to a YouTube show with a loudmouth moron like myself in order to learn the basics of this story. This just shows you the media really does manufacture consent, and the media really is establishment propaganda. Because in a sane world, this is a bombshell story that they talk about for a week. And I haven't heard anything on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, and most even print outlets haven't touched this yet. So massive credit to The Guardian. Remember, it was The Guardian that originally did the Snowden leaks with Glenn Greenwald. So they have a record of actually, breaking some super important stories. But this time the media is not running with this. And it's amazing because even the Snowden story they ran with, a bunch of WikiLeaks they ran with, but they're not running with this one. And that's absolutely infuriating. But, it's huge. There's a huge leak. And by the way, they're releasing more and more over time other people who are on the list. And my guess is, even though they say, it's impossible to spy on Americans with this, or, American government officials, my guess is there's going to be a lot of Americans on this list. And there's going to be some bombshell ones. Some, top-ranking U.S. officials. Because everybody, internationally, regardless of who's an ally with who or whatever, everybody wants to spy on everybody. But now we know this company, totally unscrupulous. They pretend like they have this really thorough process, completely unscrupulous in who they're selling this spyware to and then who it's used on. You know, if you really vetted their human rights record, then why the hell was it over 180 journalists who were spied on? Just so everybody understands, the journalists in question are real journalists. These are people who are looking into corruption in their respective countries, looking into war and things of that nature, exposing people in high-level positions. People who were looking into the drug war. So you have human rights activists and journalists and completely innocent people on this list. Because the fact of the matter is, as a general rule, anybody who wants to use the spyware is not going to be using it solely on criminals and terrorists. They're going to use it on whoever they feel threatens their power in any way, shape, or form. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. That's exactly what we're learning here. And the people on the list, it's amazing who's on the list. Eventually, it comes for everybody. I mean, the French president is on the list. That's insane. So, I don't know why this story isn't bigger. I don't know why more people aren't talking about it. And I don't know why this is allowed. By the way, everybody go to Edward Snowden's Twitter feed because he's been going off about this, and obviously he's sort of an expert now on these issues. And he's got ideas as to how you fix this and what you ban and all that. I'm not an expert. I can't give you the answers on that front. All I know is this is a dirty, dirty industry. They're absolute brazen liars pretending it's, everything's on the up and up. And this needs to be called out. This needs to be exposed. And this needs to be stopped. And it's amazing that this sort of spyware exists. And it's just so casually being used and sold to the worst of the worst. Authoritarian dictators, murderers, likely drug lords. Is there anybody they didn't sell it to? We're probably going to learn that, one of the top clients are legit terrorist groups. Not just authoritarian governments and dictators, but like some flat-out terrorists. Because they're completely unscrupulous with it. And so, we'll see. More leaks are coming out. The first batch of leaks included the French president. If it only gets more explosive from here, then Jesus Christ. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.